Usually when we talk about diagnosing a problem, uh, there's this built-in expectation of precision. Like, it feels almost like engineering, right? You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points to the screen and says, well, there it is.
Yeah, it's highly binary, broken or not broken. The causality is just clean and entirely visible.
Right. But then you look at our modern work lives, and that clean causality it completely vanishes.
Yeah.
Imagine you're driving down the highway, right? You press the gas pedal, the engine starts screaming, the dashboard is flashing red, but the steering wheel feels completely disconnected from the tires. You're putting in all this energy, but you have no control over where the vehicle is actually going.
That is so accurate.
And that is the exact feeling I suspect you, listening to this right now, might have at work. Like, everything is speeding up, the pressure is immense, yet our organizations feel increasingly fragile, heavy, and just completely stuck in the mud.
Well, what we are looking at there is the absolute definition of a structural mismatch, because the frustration you're describing, it comes from trying to drive a machine that has fundamentally changed underneath us. I mean, we are applying industrial age controls to a network age reality.
Okay, let's unpack this because this mismatch is exactly what we're getting into today. Welcome to the deep dive. We are drawing from some really incredible insights in Rodolfo Enrique de Oliveira's 2026 book, Conscious Leadership. Specifically, we're looking at chapters 5 and 11.
Yeah, those chapters are foundational.
They really are. And our mission here is to explore how the rules of nature, biology, and physics, specifically the properties of what are called complex adaptive systems, can be applied to organizational management. We want to figure out how to transform those rigid, stuck bureaucracies into resilient living systems. So we are basically talking about shifting our entire mental model from the logic of a machine to the logic of a living ecosystem.
And that mental shift is, well, it's the prerequisite for any kind of meaningful leadership today. For centuries, really since the Industrial Revolution, we've relied entirely on linear thinking. We viewed organizations as complicated systems.
Complicated, like a car engine or a meticulously engineered mechanical watch, maybe?
Precisely that. A complicated system, no matter how many thousands of pieces it has, can be taken apart. You can analyze its individual gears, optimize the carburetor, replace a spark plug, put it all back together, and it works perfectly.
Because the parts do exactly what they're told.
Right. You can predict its behavior with absolute certainty because the parts don't change their nature when they interact. But modern organizations operating in a highly networked global economy, they are no longer just complicated. They are complex adaptive systems, or CAS for short.
CAS, right?
Yeah, and you cannot reduce a complex adaptive system to its individual parts because those parts, the human beings, the teams, the software, they're constantly interacting, learning from each other, and rewriting their own rules based on those interactions.
So it's like the difference between that mechanical watch and a rainforest. You can fix the watch by swapping out a broken gear, but you can't fix a rainforest by cutting down a single tree or introducing a new insect.
No, you definitely cannot.
Because the entire network responds, right? Like the soil chemistry changes, the predator-prey dynamics shift, and the whole ecosystem adapts in ways you could never predict just by looking at that one tree.
That analogy perfectly captures the dynamic. And an important scientific distinction we need to make here from the text is that complexity is not the same thing as chaos.
Oh, that's a really good point.
Yeah, people often use the words interchangeably, complex, chaotic, unpredictable. But a complex system is not automatically an adaptive one. I mean, chaos is unpredictable, but it doesn't learn.
Right, it just destroys.
Exactly. Think of a massive hurricane. It has swirling, interacting parts, and it operates with massive energy. But a hurricane doesn't remember its past. It doesn't learn from the last island it hit to become a smarter hurricane.
It just dissipates, like it runs out of energy and it's gone.
Exactly. An immune system, on the other hand, is a complex adaptive system because it retains a history of infections. It learns. It literally physically adapts its internal structure based on its experience with a virus so it can respond better next time.
Which means the tragedy of modern management is that we're trying to manage our companies like they are mechanical watches, when in reality, they behave like immune systems.
Yes, that is the core issue.
And when executives try to optimize these living systems through rigid top-down control, standardizing every single process, dictating every outcome from a corner office, they don't actually create order. They create what the book calls a tax on human potential.
Right, the tax.
Yeah, they suppress the organization's natural ability to learn, sense the environment, and adapt.
And that managerial instinct to enforce stricter controls usually kicks in right when the environment gets unpredictable, the market gets volatile. So leadership says, well, we need to tighten the ship, optimize for efficiency, cut the fat.
Which sounds so reasonable on paper.
It does, but doing that to a living system is the exact wrong move. To understand why, we have to look at cybernetics, specifically W. Ross Ashby's law of requisite variety.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Ashby's law. I kept rereading this part of the research because it feels so counterintuitive to everything they teach in business school. Walk us through it.
Okay, so the law states something beautifully simple. Only variety can destroy variety.
Only variety can destroy variety.
Okay. Yeah. In practical terms, it means that for any system to survive, its internal regulatory capacity, so its range of possible responses, must match or exceed the environmental variety or the complexity it faces on the outside.
So if the market throws 100 different types of curveballs at your company, your internal organization needs 100 different ways to hit them.
Precisely.
Because if you only have 10 rigid, standardized processes and the market throws curveball number 11, you just strike out.
That is the math of survival right there. If your environment is highly variable, your internal system must be equally variable to absorb those shocks. But let's look at what we actually do in traditional corporate management.
We optimize.
We optimize, we standardize, we try to make everything hyper-efficient. The framework we are exploring explicitly points out a dangerous managerial delusion, which is that viability does not equal efficiency.
Wait, viability does not equal efficiency.
Right. In a mechanical system, redundancy is seen as pure waste. If you have two parts doing the same job or inventory sitting in a warehouse, you eliminate it to save money.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate for a second here. Isn't efficiency the entire point of a modern business?
Yeah.
Like if a CEO is listening to us say, stop optimizing, they're going to panic.
Oh, absolutely they will.
Because efficiency is how you reduce overhead. It's how you hit your quarterly targets. I mean, if you aren't efficient, your competitors will eat you alive, right?
Well, that is the linear industrial age mindset talking. And to be fair, it worked beautifully for running assembly lines in 1950. But in a complex adaptive system dealing with modern volatility, redundancy, slack, and overlap are not waste. They are reservoirs of response capacity.
Reservoirs of response capacity. That's a great phrase.
It is, right.
Mm-hmm.
Think about the global supply chain crisis a few years ago. Companies that optimized for absolute peak efficiency using just-in-time manufacturing had zero slack.
Right. No extra inventory, no secondary suppliers.
Exactly, because that was considered wasteful.
They traded all their resilience for a slightly better margin?
Exactly. They were heavily optimized, but the moment a massive environmental shock hit, like a port closure or a geopolitical conflict, those highly optimized, rigid bureaucracies completely fractured.
They just snapped.
They snapped. Because they stripped out their internal variety. They had no alternate pathways to route around the problem. When you optimize a living system for maximum efficiency, you are systematically trading your future adaptability for your present comfort. You are creating a robustness-fragility trade-off.
Okay, I am fully tracking now. So if we manage the rainforest like a watch, and we try to make it perfectly efficient by removing every redundant species, we completely strip away its ability to survive a drought.
Exactly. You make it incredibly fragile.
So if we can't optimize organizations like machines, and we can't rely on rigid chains of command, how do we actually structure them? Like, you drop the rigid control, how does information even move without everything falling apart?
It comes down to understanding the mechanics of how living organizations actually function, starting with nonlinearity and feedback.
Nonlinearity, okay.
Yeah. In linear, complicated systems, a small action has a small effect. A big action has a big effect. It's proportional. But in a complex adaptive system, causality is nonlinear. Small actions can trigger disproportionate, massive effects.
And the research uses the sandpile avalanche analogy for this, right?
Yes, the sand pile. Imagine dropping sand, grain by grain, onto a table. For a long time, the grains just build up into a pile. Nothing dramatic happens.
It's just a normal pile of sand.
Right. But eventually, the pile reaches a critical state. You drop one single extra grain of sand, and the entire pile collapses in an avalanche.
Oh, wow. And in a business context, that one grain of sand is, I don't know, the single customer complaint that suddenly goes viral and destroys a brand's reputation overnight.
Exactly.
Or it's the one small autonomous team that tweaks a feature and accidentally unlocks a billion-dollar revenue stream. You just can't predict the avalanche by looking at the individual grain.
Precisely. You have to understand the systemic feedback loops, because in a machine, an interaction is just friction, But in a living system, feedback loops turn interaction into actual intelligence.
Right, it's how the organization learns that the market is shifting.
Yes, if your frontline employees are noticing a change in customer behavior, but your rigid hierarchy prevents that feedback from reaching the product team for 6 months, you are basically flying blind.
But if we rely on constant feedback, instead of a boss mapping out the blueprint, who settles disputes?
That's the big question.
Right, let's say it's a Tuesday afternoon, and the marketing team fundamentally disagrees with the product engineering team on a launch feature. In a traditional hierarchy, the VP steps in, breaks the tie, and tells everyone what to do. If we are operating as a complex adaptive system, how does this get resolved without descending into a turf war?
Well, that brings us to the mechanics of structure. The alternative to a rigid hierarchy isn't a free-for-all, it's a holarchy.
A holarchy. With an O, right?
Correct, holarchy. In a holarchy, coherence arises from local interactions forming nested levels of order. Think of how cells form tissues. Tissues form organs, and organs form bodies.
Okay, so there's structure, but it's built from the bottom up.
Right. There is no central brain cell dictating the daily metabolic functions of a single skin cell. The skin cells self-organize based on local rules and feedback.
So in that marketing versus product example, a holarchy resolves the conflict by pushing the decision rights to the people closest to the information.
Exactly, rather than escalating it to a VP who hasn't spoken to a real customer in 3 years.
So they govern themselves through shared parameters. Like
Mhm.
the constraints aren't there to force a specific outcome. They are there to guide the process.
Yes, and the metaphor I love from the framework is that constraints are not cages. They are riverbanks.
Oh, I love that. Riverbanks.
Right, a cage restricts movement entirely. A riverbank channels the flow of the water, giving it direction and power without freezing it into solid ice.
So if marketing and product have a clear set of guiding principles, those are their riverbanks. They can experiment, iterate, and resolve the friction locally based on what the actual market feedback is telling them, not just what a VP's ego dictates.
Exactly. And to build those strong riverbanks and to ensure you have enough variety to satisfy Ashby's law, you need different types of materials. You need diverse responses.
Which leads us to the dynamic of evolution.
Yes. To survive, a complex adaptive system must remain far from equilibrium. It has to constantly exchange energy and information with the outside world.
And this is where diversity becomes a structural imperative, not just a corporate buzzword or a compliance checkbox.
Exactly.
Because if every single agent in the system, let's say an entire executive board, went to the same 3 business schools, worked at the same consulting firms, and thinks the exact same way, you have absolutely zero internal variety.
And going back to Ashby's law, without internal variety, you simply cannot survive external variety. Cognitive diversity, experiential diversity, background diversity, these are the structural substrates of creativity and resilience.
Right, so when a novel crisis hits, a homogeneous team will only see one potential solution. And if that solution fails, the whole system collapses.
But a diverse holarchy will generate a dozen different localized experiments simultaneously, finding the one that works and scaling it through those feedback loops we talked about.
Okay, so I want to pause here. If I'm a manager listening to this, I'm terrified. You're telling me to embrace non-linearity and let my team self-organize. How is this not just anarchy?
That's a very fair reaction. But the text is clear. Complexity is not anarchy. The difference is that your influence shifts. It shifts from direct control, where you dictate outcomes, to architectural constraint.
Meaning you shape the environment where good decisions are likely to happen rather than making the decisions yourself.
Precisely. You govern the boundaries, not the individual actions.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? I mean, moving from Chapter 5 to Chapter 11, we go from the science to the lived reality. If you're a team lead or an executive, how does leadership actually function when you let go of the steering wheel?
Well, it requires shifting your fundamental identity. You have to move from being an architect to being a gardener.
The architect versus the gardener. So the architect draws a static blueprint. They hand it to the construction crew and expect the building to look exactly like the drawing. Any deviation is a failure.
Exactly. But the gardener knows they cannot force a tomato plant to grow faster by aggressively pulling on its leaves.
Right, you just uproot it.
Yeah. The gardener's job is not to manufacture the fruit. The gardener cultivates the soil, ensures there is adequate sunlight, attends to the feedback the plant gives, like wilted leaves mean more water, yellow leaves might mean a nutrient deficiency.
And they protect the boundaries.
Yes, they create the conditions for growth.
And a big part of creating those conditions in a corporate setting involves managing what the research calls the weight of compliance versus the lightness of autonomy. This is so incredibly relevant to anyone drowning in red tape right now.
It really is the core of bureaucratic bloat. But we have to understand why heavy structure exists in the first place.
Why is that?
Rigid structure exists to bear load. When individuals in an organization lack mature judgment, or more commonly, when they simply aren't trusted with the broader strategic context, the organization compensates.
Right. It builds heavy rules, layers of middle management for intense supervision, and massive escalation paths. That is the weight of compliance.
Exactly.
And it takes so much physical and emotional energy just to make sure people are doing what they are told. It's exhausting.
And it slows everything down to a crawl. But when you transition to a living system, you distribute autonomy and judgment to the edges of the organization, to the developers writing the code, the customer success reps on the phone, the logistics managers on the docks.
And when you do that, the structural load fundamentally shifts.
Yes. You no longer need heavy supervision because the person on the front line has the context, the trust, and the feedback loops to make the right call. The organization sheds that bureaucratic weight. It becomes lighter, faster, and incredibly responsive.
Okay, but I can hear a skeptical executive listening to this and asking, if everyone at the edges is making their own autonomous decisions, how do you keep the company from flying apart into a million fragmented pieces?
That is always the fear.
Right. If there's no heavy command and control, what actually keeps the holiday together?
The framework provides a very specific answer to that: gravity.
Gravity.
Gravity is the systemic condition that naturally emerges when two specific elements synchronize within the organization: wholeness and evolutionary purpose.
Okay, let's break those down. Wholeness, meaning a shared, deeply felt identity.
Yeah.
Essentially answering the question, who are we and how do we relate to one another?
Yes, exactly. And evolutionary purpose, meaning a shared sensing direction. Where are we going and what does the world need from us right now?
So when a company cultivates a lived shared identity and a real adaptive shared direction, those two forces create gravity.
And that gravity entirely replaces the need for a hierarchical boss constantly cracking the whip. The shared purpose pulls everyone in the same general direction, even as they operate with high local autonomy to navigate their specific obstacles.
So leadership is no longer a title you put on your email signature. It basically becomes the system's capacity to keep judgment coupled to consequence.
That's a great way to put it. In the old model, the executive in the corner office makes a sweeping policy change, but they don't feel the pain when the software crashes or the customer yells. They are totally insulated from the consequence.
Which breaks the feedback loop.
Exactly. In a complex, adaptive system, strategy is not a static 5-year plan handed down from the mountaintop. Strategy is a continuous practice of orientation. Leaders must allow decision rights to migrate to where the information is richest.
You trust the local nodes of your network to react to the local environment, held together by the gravity of your shared purpose. It's what the book calls distributed leadership.
Yeah.
This is a profound shift in how we think about human potential at work. If we zoom out and look at the historical progression here, the core revelation of this deep dive becomes really clear.
Oh, so?
Well, think about it. The central constraint of the industrial age was energy and physical scale.
Yeah.
Right? Like, how do we build the biggest factories?
Right.
Then the central constraint of the digital age, which we just lived through, was information and connectivity. How do we process all the data?
Mm.
But the central constraint of the network age, the era we are stepping into right now, is human judgment. I mean, we already have the algorithms that can process billions of data points. We have all the information. But to survive, organizations have to stop trying to conquer complexity by building heavier bureaucracies. They have to start embracing complexity through distributed autonomy.
That is a brilliant summary. And recognizing that reality brings us to a final, really vital concept from Chapter 12 of De Oliveira's work, the idea of the Promethean misfit and the ethical burden of foresight.
The ethical burden of foresight. It sounds like it carries a lot of weight.
Oh, it does. Once you understand that you are not operating a machine, but participating in a deeply interconnected living system, the nature of your responsibility changes completely.
Because in a complicated machine, local actions just have local consequences.
Exactly. If you turn a gear, you only affect the adjacent gear. But in a complex adaptive network, local actions have non-local systemic consequences.
Wait, so like a sourcing decision made in a procurement office in London can irreversibly impact an ecological system in Brazil and a labor market in Southeast Asia.
Precisely. The steering wheel isn't just connected to the tires anymore, it's connected to the entire ecosystem.
And the burden of foresight means that now that you know this, now that you can see the invisible threads connecting the hierarchy, you can no longer plead ignorance. You can't just say, well, I was doing my job or I was following the optimization blueprint.
Exactly. You are no longer a cog in a machine. You are an active, conscious agent shaping a living ecosystem.
Wow. Once you see this system, you really can't unsee it. So we leave you with this final thought to mull over. Now that you understand the weight of your participation in this network, how will this awareness change the very next decision you make at work?
Are you going to keep trying to optimize the machine, or are you going to start tending to the garden?
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Take a look at your own organization today and ask yourself, are you building cages or are you shaping riverbanks? I'll see you next time.